The training facility on Kepler Station buzzed with activity as cadets from dozens of species moved through their daily routines. The massive structure, built in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, served as the premier military academy for the Galactic Defense Coalition. Here, the future officers of the Alliance learned to fight alongside beings they had never dreamed of encountering. Cadet Marcus Chen stood at attention in the weapons training bay, sweat beading on his forehead despite the climate control. At 19, he was one of the youngest humans ever accepted into the academy, and he felt the weight of representing his entire species with every breath. Around him, towering Krillian warriors practiced with plasma rifles while sleek Viridian scouts moved through stealth exercises with fluid grace. Pathetic, growled General Thraktar, his massive frame casting a shadow over Marcus. The Zephyrian commander stood nearly 3 meters tall, his scaled hide the color of burnished copper, with 4 powerful arms that could crush steel. His species had been warriors for millennia, conquering systems across the galaxy before joining the Coalition. "Your aim is worse than a hatchling's first hunt." Marcus gritted his teeth and raised his weapon again. The plasma rifle felt heavy in his hands, designed for beings twice his size and strength. The target practice course required hitting 12 moving targets in under 30 seconds, a feat that came naturally to most alien cadets but pushed human reflexes to their limits. He squeezed the trigger, energy bolts lancing out toward the holographic enemies. 5 hits, 7, 10. The timer reached 28 seconds as he lined up his final shot, but the target moved at the last instant. His bolt sailed wide, striking the barrier wall instead. "Again," Thraktar commanded, his voice like grinding stone. "Your species claims to be warriors, yet you cannot even complete a basic exercise that Viridian younglings master in their first week." Other cadets had stopped their own training to watch. Marcus felt their eyes on him, some pitying, others curious, a few openly mocking. The human delegation to the academy was small, only 50 cadets out of thousands, and their reputation remained largely unproven among the galactic community. "Sir, with respect," Marcus began, "the equipment is calibrated for species with enhanced reflexes and—" The slap came without warning. Thraktar's massive hand struck Marcus across the face with enough force to send the young human stumbling backward. The crack echoed through the training bay like a gunshot, and every conversation stopped. Marcus tasted blood where his teeth cut the inside of his cheek. "Excuses are for the weak," Thraktar snarled. "Your species begged for inclusion in this academy. You claimed humans deserved to stand alongside true warriors, yet when faced with challenge you whine like a wounded prey animal." Marcus straightened slowly, one hand pressed to his stinging cheek. Around the bay, cadets watched in stunned silence. Physical violence between instructors and students was not unheard of, but it was rare and usually reserved for the most serious infractions. Public humiliation like this could end a cadet's career before it began. The smart move would be to apologize, to accept the punishment and try to improve. Marcus knew this, could feel the expectant silence waiting for his submission. That was how things worked in the rigid hierarchy of the Coalition military. Instructors were absolute authorities, their word law. But something in Marcus's chest burned hotter than the pain in his face. Maybe it was the dismissive way Thraktar had spoken about his species. Maybe it was the memory of his grandfather's stories about human soldiers who never backed down from a fight. Or maybe it was simply the stubborn streak that had gotten him into trouble his whole life. Marcus set down the plasma rifle with deliberate care and turned to face General Thraktar directly. The alien towered over him, forearms crossed in a gesture of contempt, expecting submission or possibly tears. What he got instead was something no one in the training bay had anticipated. "General," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fire in his cheek, "I request permission to demonstrate human combat doctrine." A ripple of shock ran through the assembled cadets. Even the Krillians, known for their battle hunger, looked stunned. No cadet had ever made such a request after being disciplined. It was unprecedented, possibly suicidal. Thraktar's eyes narrowed to slits. "You dare?" "I'm not making excuses for my marksmanship, sir," Marcus interrupted, something that would have been unthinkable moments before. "You're right that I failed the exercise, but you're wrong about humans being weak. We've been fighting wars on our world for thousands of years, and we learned something that maybe other species haven't had to." The general's scales seemed to darken with anger. "And what is that, little human?" Marcus felt every eye in the bay focused on him. His fellow human cadets looked terrified, probably certain he was about to get them all expelled or worse. The alien students watched with the fascination of predators observing unusual prey behavior. We learned that sometimes the biggest, strongest opponent isn't the one who wins, Marcus said. Sometimes victory goes to the one who refuses to quit, who adapts, who finds another way. You want to see what makes humans warriors? Then let me show you. The training bay had gone so quiet that the hum of the station's life support system seemed deafening. Thraktar's 4 hands clenched into fists, and for a moment Marcus wondered if the general might actually attack him. The Zephyrian's reputation for violence was well known throughout the academy. Instead, something unexpected happened. The corner of Thraktar's mouth twitched upward in what might have been the beginning of a smile. It was not a pleasant expression on his predatory features. "Very well, Cadet Chen," the general said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You wish to demonstrate human combat doctrine? Then you shall have your chance. Tomorrow at dawn, full combat simulation. You against 3 of our best senior cadets. Hand-to-hand combat, small unit tactics, survival scenarios, everything your species claims to excel at." Marcus swallowed hard but kept his expression steady. "Thank you, sir. I accept." "Oh, but there are conditions," Thraktar continued, clearly enjoying himself. "When you lose, and you will lose, your entire human delegation will be transferred to support roles. No more combat training, no more officer track. You will spend your remaining time here learning to maintain equipment and file reports." The stakes hit Marcus like a physical blow. It wasn't just his own career on the line anymore. Every human at the academy would pay the price for his moment of defiance. He saw the fear in his classmates' faces, understood the magnitude of what he had just done, but backing down now would be worse than losing tomorrow. It would confirm every prejudice the galaxy held about humanity. "Understood, sir," Marcus said. "And if I win?" Thraktar's laugh was like grinding metal. "If you win, little human, then perhaps I will reconsider my opinion of your species. But that will not happen." The general turned and stalked away, leaving Marcus standing alone in the center of the training bay. Slowly, conversations resumed, but he could feel the weight of every stare. Tomorrow would either validate humanity's place among the stars or condemn them to permanent second-class status. Marcus touched his still-burning cheek and allowed himself a grim smile. Time to show the galaxy what humans were really made of. Word of Marcus's challenge spread through Kepler Station like wildfire. By evening, every cadet in the academy knew about the confrontation in the weapons bay and the impossible task the young human had accepted. In the mess halls, dormitories, and training areas, the story grew with each telling, but the core remained the same. A human had dared to challenge the system, and tomorrow he would pay the price. Marcus sat alone in the human quarters, staring at a tactical display showing the Academy's combat simulation chambers. His fellow human cadets had given him space after dinner, unsure whether to offer support or express their anger at being dragged into his personal vendetta. He didn't blame them. If he failed tomorrow, their dreams of military careers would die with his pride. "Brooding won't help," came a voice from the doorway. Marcus looked up to see Sarah Kim, one of the senior human cadets, entering with 2 cups of synthetic coffee. She was 22, 3 years older than Marcus, and had been at the academy long enough to understand its unspoken rules. "I'm not brooding," Marcus replied, accepting the coffee. "I'm planning." Sarah sat across from him, studying his face where a dark bruise had formed from Thraktar's blow. "Marcus, what were you thinking? You could have just taken the discipline and moved on. Now you've put all of us at risk." "I was thinking about my grandfather," Marcus said quietly. "He fought in the resource wars on Earth, back when nations still fought over water and oil. He used to tell me stories about battles where human forces faced impossible odds against better-equipped enemies. This isn't Earth, and we're not fighting for resources," Sarah pointed out. "This is about proving we belong here, and you just made that 10 times harder." Marcus pulled up his personnel file on the display, studying his own training scores. Below average in marksmanship, average in physical conditioning, slightly above average in tactics and strategy. Nothing that would suggest he could defeat 3 elite alien cadets in single combat. "Do you know what my grandfather's unit was called?" he asked. "The Ghost Battalion. Not because they were stealthy, but because by all rights they should have been dead a dozen times over. They survived because they refused to play by the enemy's rules. Sarah leaned forward. What are you saying? I'm saying that General Thraktar expects me to fail because he's measuring me by alien standards. Zephyrian strength, Viridian speed, Krillian endurance. But humans don't win by being the biggest or the fastest. Before Sarah could respond, the door chimed. Marcus called out permission to enter, and to his surprise, 3 more cadets filed in. But these weren't humans. They were aliens who rarely associated with the human delegation. The first was Kixtel, a Viridian whose sleek, silver-scaled form moved with predatory grace. The second was Grond, a young Krillian whose rocky hide and massive frame made him look like a walking boulder. The third was the biggest surprise of all, Zarathul, a Zephyrian female and General Thraktar's own niece. We heard about your challenge, Kixtal said, his voice carrying the musical quality of his species. We wanted to speak with you. Marcus stood, unsure of their intentions. Relations between human and alien cadets were cordial but distant, shaped by centuries of mutual ignorance and recent contact. What can I do for you? Grond spoke next, his words rumbling like an avalanche. We have trained with the cadets you will face tomorrow. They are formidable. Vexter is the top-ranked Zephyrian in combat simulation. Sildan holds the Academy record for stealth operations. Thokmar has never been defeated in hand-to-hand combat. Then why are you here? Sarah asked suspiciously. To gloat? Zarathul stepped forward, her copper scales catching the light. She was nearly as tall as her uncle, but built for speed rather than raw power. Because we respect what you did today, Marcus Chen. My uncle has ruled through fear and intimidation for too long. Someone needed to stand up to him. Even if that someone is doomed to fail? Marcus asked. Perhaps, Kixtel admitted. But failure with honor is better than success through submission. Your species may be young to the galaxy, but you showed courage today that many would lack. Marcus felt a flicker of hope. If other cadets could see past species prejudice, maybe there was more support than he had realized. But hope wouldn't help him win tomorrow's challenge. Tell me about them, he said. The 3 I'm facing. Everything you know. For the next hour, the alien cadets shared intelligence about Marcus's opponents. Vextar was the prototype Zephyrian warrior, massive, strong, and utterly confident in his superiority. He favored direct assault and overwhelming force. Sildan was his opposite, preferring to strike from shadows and disappear before retaliation could come. Thokmar fell somewhere between them, a methodical fighter who studied his opponents and exploited their weaknesses. They have trained together for 2 years, Zarathul explained. They know each other's strengths and will coordinate perfectly. The combat simulation will test multiple scenarios: urban warfare, wilderness survival, close-quarters battle, and tactical command. Each scenario favors different species, Grond added. The urban environment suits Viridian agility. Wilderness survival advantages Krillian endurance. Close combat belongs to Zephyrian strength. And tactical command? Marcus asked. The alien cadets exchanged glances. That is the one area where species matters least, Kixtal said. It tests creativity, adaptation, and the ability to make decisions under pressure. If you have any chance, it will be there. After the aliens left, Marcus and Sarah remained in the quarters, poring over tactical manuals and simulation records. The more they learned, the more hopeless the situation appeared. Each of Marcus's opponents excelled in areas where humans struggled, and their combined experience far exceeded his own. There has to be something, Sarah muttered, scrolling through combat doctrine files. Some advantage were missing. Marcus leaned back in his chair, mind racing. His grandfather's stories echoed in his memory, tales of human ingenuity triumphing over superior firepower, guerrilla tactics, psychological warfare, asymmetric strategies that turned enemy strengths into weaknesses. What if we're looking at this wrong? He said suddenly. Everyone expects me to try matching them strength for strength, speed for speed. But what if I don't? What do you mean? Marcus pulled up the Academy's historical records, searching for patterns in combat simulations. Look at this. Every recorded victory follows the same basic template. Superior firepower, better positioning, faster reflexes. Winners succeed by being better at conventional tactics. That's how wars are won. Marcus. Not human wars. Marcus found what he was looking for. A file labeled Terran Military History, Unconventional Warfare. Humans spent centuries fighting opponents who should have crushed us. Spanish conquistadors against Aztec empires, American revolutionaries against the British Empire, Vietnamese guerrillas against modern military forces. We didn't win those conflicts by being stronger. Sarah began to understand. You want to fight dirty. I want to fight human. Marcus smiled for the first time since the confrontation with Thraktar. Every species in the galaxy has evolved their own concept of honorable combat. Zephyrians believe in direct confrontation. Viridians prefer elegant precision. Krillians value endurance contests. And humans believe in winning. Marcus began pulling up files on improvised weapons, environmental exploitation, and psychological manipulation. We're the species that figured out how to kill mammoths with pointy sticks, how to defeat knights in armor using peasants with crossbows, how to bring down governments with information warfare. The next few hours passed in intense preparation. Marcus studied not just his opponent's strengths, but their cultural blind spots, Zephyrian honor codes that prevented certain tactics, Viridian aesthetic preferences that could be exploited, Krillian pack mentalities that created predictable behaviors. As dawn approached, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since arriving at the academy: confidence. Not in his ability to match alien capabilities, but in his uniquely human approach to problem-solving. Sarah walked with him toward the combat simulation chambers where hundreds of cadets had gathered to witness the spectacle. General Thraktar waited at the entrance, surrounded by his senior staff. The alien commander's expression showed smug satisfaction, certain of the outcome. Ready to surrender your pride, human? Thraktar growled as Marcus approached. Marcus met the general's gaze without flinching. Ready to show you what humans do when cornered, sir. The simulation chamber doors hissed open, revealing a complex multi-environment arena that would test every aspect of military training. Marcus's three opponents were already inside, looking confident and relaxed. As Marcus stepped across the threshold, he whispered a promise to himself and to his species. Time to teach the galaxy why you should never underestimate a human with nothing left to lose. The combat simulation chamber materialized around Marcus like a nightmare-given form. Towering buildings stretched toward an artificial sky, their surfaces scarred by simulated weapons fire. Broken vehicles and debris littered the streets, creating a maze of obstacles and potential ambush points. The urban warfare scenario was designed to test tactical thinking, environmental awareness, and team coordination under pressure. Marcus crouched behind the wreckage of what had once been a hover transport, studying the arena through his helmet's heads-up display. Somewhere in this artificial cityscape, 3 of the Academy's best cadets were hunting him. The simulation would run for 30 minutes with victory conditions based on objectives completed and opponents eliminated. His earpiece crackled with the voice of the simulation controller. Cadet Chen, your mission is to secure 3 strategic locations within the urban environment while neutralizing hostile forces. Your opponents have the same objectives. Engagement begins in 10 seconds. Marcus checked his equipment one final time. Standard issue armor, plasma rifle, sidearm, and basic field gear. Nothing special. Nothing that would give him an advantage over aliens who had evolved for warfare. But that was exactly what he was counting on. The engagement signal echoed across the simulated city, and Marcus immediately did something his opponents would never expect. He abandoned his primary weapon. The plasma rifle was powerful, accurate, and perfectly calibrated for the arena's dimensions. It was also exactly what 3 experienced cadets would anticipate facing from a human opponent. Instead, Marcus slung the rifle across his back and drew his combat knife, a simple metal blade that most cadets considered an emergency backup at best. Moving through the debris-strewn streets with careful steps, Marcus began implementing the strategy he had developed during his sleepless night of preparation. While his opponents would be advancing toward objectives using conventional small-unit tactics, he intended to turn the urban environment itself into a weapon. The first strategic location was a communications array positioned on top of a partially collapsed building. Marcus could see movement in the windows of surrounding structures. His opponents were already in position, probably setting up crossfires and overwatch positions. A direct assault would be suicide against 3 coordinated opponents with superior physical capabilities. So Marcus didn't go up. He went down. The simulation included a realistic underground infrastructure, maintenance tunnels, sewer systems, and utility passages that connected the buildings above. Most cadets ignored these areas, viewing them as irrelevant to surface combat objectives. But Marcus had studied human urban warfare tactics from Earth's history, where resistance fighters had used tunnel networks to devastate occupying forces. Crawling through a storm drain that ran beneath the target building, Marcus counted off distance and timing. Above him, he could hear the subtle vibrations of footsteps as his opponents moved into position. Zephyrian weight distribution was different from human patterns, creating a distinct rhythm he had memorized during his preparation. That had to be Vextar, the powerhouse of the enemy team. The Zephyrian was positioning himself for a commanding view of the approaches to the communications array, exactly as doctrine dictated. What he hadn't considered was that his enemy might already be directly underneath him. Marcus found the utility access point he had identified in the building schematics. The metal panel was designed to support maintenance access, not combat operations, but human-specific tactics often involved exploiting infrastructure in unintended ways. With careful precision, Marcus began weakening the structural supports of the floor above him. Not enough to cause a catastrophic collapse. The simulation had safety, protocols that would prevent serious injury, but sufficient to create what military historians called a surprise vertical insertion. The work took precious minutes, time his opponents were using to strengthen their positions. Marcus could hear radio chatter as they coordinated their defensive setup. Sildan's voice was a whispered hiss as he reported no sign of human movement. Thokmar rumbled acknowledgement while confirming his overwatch position. Vextar simply grunted, impatient for the engagement to begin. Marcus smiled in the darkness of the tunnel. They were thinking in terms of conventional human tactics: advance under cover, engage at medium range, rely on superior marksmanship. Everything the Academy taught about human combat doctrine suggested that Marcus would try to use terrain and positioning to offset his physical disadvantages. They were right about the terrain part. They were wrong about how he planned to use it. The floor gave way with a grinding crash that echoed throughout the simulated city. Vextar, caught completely off guard, plummeted into the tunnel system as Marcus rolled clear. The massive Zephyrian landed hard, his heavy combat armor clanging against the concrete walls of the narrow passage. But Marcus wasn't trying to fight Vextar in the tunnel. That would be suicide against an opponent twice his size and strength. Instead, as the alien warrior struggled to orient himself in the confined space, Marcus was already moving. He scrambled up through the hole he had created, emerging into the building where Vextar had been positioned moments before. The Zephyrian's abandoned plasma rifle lay on the floor, along with his tactical gear and communication equipment. "Vextar, report," came Sildan's voice over the radio. Marcus keyed the transmit button, doing his best impression of Zephyrian vocal patterns. Position: compromised. Regrouping. It wouldn't fool them for long, but it bought him precious seconds. Marcus grabbed Vextar's equipment and moved toward the communications array. Below him, he could hear the sound of the Zephyrian trying to climb out of the tunnel, hampered by his heavy armor and the awkward dimensions of the passage. The communications array itself was a sophisticated piece of equipment surrounded by defensive barriers. Normally, securing it would require eliminating the defenders first, then holding the position while downloading tactical data, a process that could take several minutes under ideal conditions. Marcus had no intention of following normal procedures. Instead of trying to operate the communications equipment, he began systematically destroying it with Vextar's plasma rifle. The alien weapon was far more powerful than anything Marcus had trained with, and within seconds the array was reduced to smoking wreckage. "What the hell is the human doing?" came Thokmar's confused voice over the intercepted radio channel. That was the problem with conventional thinking. His opponents expected him to play by the same rules they followed. Secure the objective, maintain position, accumulate points for successful completion. But Marcus had realized something during his tactical analysis. The simulation didn't require him to use the communications array. It only required him to secure it. A pile of molten metal was definitely secure. Explosions echoed from other parts of the simulated city as his opponents began moving toward his position. Marcus could see muzzle flashes in distant windows as Sildan attempted to provide covering fire for Thokmar's advance. They were adapting quickly to the unexpected situation, but they were still thinking in terms of conventional urban warfare. Marcus decided it was time to Introduce them to human concepts of environmental exploitation. The building's structural integrity had been compromised by his tunneling work. A few well-placed plasma bursts at load-bearing points would bring down entire sections of the structure. Not enough to harm anyone. The simulation's safety protocols would prevent that, but sufficient to deny terrain to his opponents and create new tactical opportunities. As the building began to shake and groan, Marcus was already moving toward his next objective. 2 more strategic locations remained, and he had 22 minutes to secure them while avoiding 3 increasingly angry and confused alien cadets. But now he had their weapons, their equipment, and most importantly, he had proven that human tactics could work against superior opponents. The key was not trying to be better aliens, but being uniquely, unpredictably human. In the observation area outside the simulation chamber, General Thraktar watched the tactical display with growing bewilderment. His 3 best cadets were veteran fighters who had dominated every previous exercise, yet somehow a single human was systematically disrupting their operations, using methods that violated every principle of modern warfare. "Sir," one of his aides whispered, "should we intervene? The human is not following standard engagement protocols." Thraktar's scales darkened with anger, but also with something else, a grudging respect for tactics he didn't understand but could not deny were effective. "No," he growled. "Let us see what other surprises this human has prepared." In the simulation, Marcus disappeared into the maze of damaged buildings, leaving his opponents to wonder what impossible thing he would do next. The real battle was just beginning. The second strategic location was a weapons cache, hidden in the basement of what appeared to be a civilian administrative building. Marcus approached it through the city's damaged storm drain system, moving like a ghost beneath the chaos he had created above. His opponents had regrouped after the communications array incident, but their radio chatter revealed growing frustration and confusion. "The human fights like a scavenger," Vextar's voice growled through the intercepted communications. The Zephyrian had finally extracted himself from the tunnel system, his armor scraped and his pride wounded. No honor, no courage, just tricks and destruction. Marcus almost laughed at that assessment. From a human perspective, he was demonstrating exactly the kind of courage that had allowed his species to survive ice ages, predators, and each other for millennia. The courage to adapt, to use every available resource, to refuse surrender even when facing impossible odds. Sildan's response was more tactical and far more dangerous. "His methods are unconventional but effective. We must stop thinking of him as a failed Zephyrian and start predicting him as a successful human." That worried Marcus. Sildan was the team's intelligence specialist, trained to analyze enemy behavior and predict tactical responses. If the Viridian began understanding human psychological patterns, the simulation could become much more difficult. Marcus reached the sub-basement access point and began his approach to the weapons cache. Unlike his first objective, this location was designed for stealth infiltration rather than defensive operations. The cache itself was concealed behind false walls and protected by sensor arrays that would trigger alarms if approached incorrectly. Standard doctrine called for careful reconnaissance, systematic sensor neutralization, and methodical extraction of the weapons inside. The entire process could take 15 minutes if performed correctly, leaving Marcus exposed and vulnerable to counterattack. So Marcus decided to redefine what correctly meant. Instead of trying to sneak past the sensor arrays, he triggered them deliberately. Alarms began wailing throughout the simulated building as security systems activated, bathing the basement in flashing red light. To his opponents, it would appear that he had made a critical error, alerting them to his position and ruining any chance of stealth. What they didn't realize was that Marcus had no intention of being stealthy. While the alarm system drew his opponents toward the building, Marcus was busy turning the weapons cache into something its designers had never intended, an improvised explosive device. Military equipment was built to exacting safety standards with multiple fail-safes to prevent accidental detonation. But those same safety systems could be exploited by someone willing to ignore conventional usage protocols. Marcus began cross-wiring power cells from different weapon systems, creating feedback loops that would cause catastrophic energy discharges. It was incredibly dangerous, potentially fatal if attempted with real equipment, but the simulation safety protocols would prevent actual harm while still registering the tactical effects of his improvised demolitions. "He's in the administrative building," came Thokmar's voice over the radio. "Sensors show him at the cache location. We can surround him." Perfect. Marcus wanted them to surround the building. The more concentrated they were, the better his plan would work. As he worked, Marcus reflected on the cultural differences that made his tactics so effective. Alien military doctrine was based on concepts of honorable combat, proportional response, and minimizing collateral damage. These were admirable principles that worked well when both sides shared similar values. But humans had learned different lessons from their violent history. Sometimes survival required abandoning honor for effectiveness. Sometimes proportional response meant accepting defeat. Sometimes collateral damage was the only way to achieve tactical objectives. The feedback loop reached critical instability, just as Marcus heard footsteps above his head. His opponents were moving into position, probably planning a coordinated assault on the cache location. They expected to find him trying to extract weapons for his own use. Instead, they found an empty room filled with unstable energy patterns that registered as a massive explosion on the simulation's tactical display. The blast, carefully contained by safety protocols but devastatingly effective within the simulation's parameters, brought down half the administrative building. The weapons cache was thoroughly destroyed, along with anyone who might have been trying to approach it through conventional routes. Impossible. Vextar's roar echoed across the tactical network. He destroyed his own objective. That was the fundamental misunderstanding. Marcus's opponents were thinking in terms of capturing objectives for their own use. But the simulation only required that he secure the strategic locations. A crater where the weapons cache used to exist was definitely secure. More importantly, the explosion had separated his opponents and damaged their communication equipment. Vextar was on one side of the rubble pile, Sildan and Thokmar on the other. For the first time since the engagement began, they were not coordinating their movements. Marcus emerged from his underground position behind Thokmar's location. The Krillian was built like a living mountain, all rock-hard hide and massive limbs designed for crushing opponents in close combat. In a fair fight, he could literally tear Marcus apart with his bare hands, so Marcus made sure it wasn't a fair fight. Human military history was filled with examples of smaller forces defeating larger ones, through what academics politely called asymmetric warfare and practitioners simply called fighting dirty. David's sling against Goliath, Greek fire against wooden ships, improvised explosive devices against armored vehicles. The principle was always the same. Find your enemy's weakness and exploit it ruthlessly. Krillians were incredibly tough, but their rocky hide was also inflexible. They had trouble with rapid directional changes, particularly when their balance was compromised. Marcus had noticed this during combat training exercises, but until now had never thought to weaponize the knowledge. Using debris from the collapsed building, Marcus constructed a series of simple mechanical traps around Thokmar's position. Nothing sophisticated, just leverage points and unstable barriers designed to create maximum confusion and disorientation. Then he began making noise. "Over here, you oversized pile of gravel," Marcus shouted, deliberately insulting Thokmar's heritage. Krillian culture placed enormous emphasis on ancestral dignity, and questioning someone's geological lineage was among their worst social taboos. The massive alien turned toward Marcus's voice with predictable fury, his rocky features twisted in rage. "You will die for that insult, soft flesh!" Thokmar charged forward with crushing force, exactly as Marcus had hoped. But instead of meeting the charge head-on, Marcus triggered his improvised trap system and disappeared back into the building's damaged infrastructure. The Krillian hit the unstable debris barrier at full speed, his momentum carrying him forward even as the carefully balanced wreckage collapsed around him. By the time he extracted himself from the pile of simulated rubble, Marcus was already moving toward the third and final strategic location. 2 objectives secured, 1 opponent temporarily neutralized, and 15 minutes remaining on the simulation clock. Marcus allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism as he moved through the urban maze toward his final target. But his radio interception revealed a disturbing development. Sildan and Vextar were no longer trying to predict his movements using conventional tactical analysis. Instead, they were studying the pattern of his unconventional attacks, looking for the psychological framework that connected his seemingly random acts of destruction He is not random. Sildan's voice carried a tone of growing understanding. Each action serves multiple purposes: elimination of the objective, disruption of our coordination, and psychological warfare against our expectations. Then how do we stop him? Vextar demanded. We stop trying to fight him as if he were one of us, Sildan replied. We start fighting him as what he is, a human. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the simulation's environmental controls. If his opponents began truly understanding human tactics, his advantages would disappear. The final objective would require a different approach entirely. The third strategic location was a command center positioned at the top of the tallest building in the simulated city. Unlike the previous objectives, this one could not be destroyed or bypassed. It had to be physically occupied and held. For a full 60 seconds while downloading critical tactical data, Marcus studied the building through his helmet's optical systems, multiple approach routes, defensive positions, and clear lines of sight for anyone trying to prevent his access. It was designed to be the simulation's climactic battle, where superior firepower and positioning would determine the victor. His opponents were already moving toward the command center, their radio chatter indicating they had finally begun to understand his psychological approach to warfare. They were adapting, learning, becoming more dangerous with every passing minute. Time for one final lesson in human unpredictability. In the observation area, General Thraktar leaned forward, his scaled features intent on the. Marcus stood at the base of the command tower, studying the 50-story structure that housed his final objective. Unlike the previous targets, this building offered no underground access, no structural weaknesses to exploit, and no way to avoid direct confrontation. The command center was positioned at the apex, surrounded by defensive barriers and monitored by security systems designed to prevent exactly the kind of infiltration he had been conducting. His three opponents were already in position. Vextar controlled the main elevator shaft, his massive frame blocking any conventional ascent. Sildan had claimed the emergency stairwell, his Viridian reflexes perfectly suited for detecting movement in the confined space. Thokmar held the external maintenance access, his Krillian endurance allowing him to monitor multiple approach routes simultaneously. They had learned from his previous tactics and adapted accordingly. No more assumptions about human limitations, no more underestimating unconventional strategies. They were treating him as a legitimate threat, which made them infinitely more dangerous. Marcus checked his remaining equipment. One plasma rifle appropriated from Vextar, limited ammunition, basic climbing gear, and the combat knife that had served him well throughout the engagement. Not much to work with against 3 elite cadets who now controlled every approach to his objective. Cadet Chen, came Sildan's voice over the general communication channel. You have fought with honor and creativity. But this final objective cannot be taken through destruction or misdirection. You must face us directly. The Viridian was offering him a chance to surrender with dignity intact. It was actually a generous gesture, considering the humiliation Marcus had subjected them to throughout the simulation. But surrendering now would validate every prejudice about human weakness, every assumption about their species' unsuitability for military service. More importantly, it would condemn every human cadet at the academy to support roles in second-class status. Marcus keyed his transmitter to broadcast on all frequencies. I appreciate the offer, but I haven't exhausted all my options yet. That was technically true, though his remaining options were limited and desperate. The command center had to be physically occupied for 60 seconds while downloading tactical data. He couldn't destroy it, couldn't bypass it, and couldn't access it without going through his opponents. But Marcus had noticed something during his analysis of the building's schematics. The command center was designed with redundant systems and multiple access points, following standard coalition protocols for critical installations. What the designers hadn't considered was that those same redundancies could be exploited by someone willing to think outside conventional parameters. Instead of trying to reach the command center from below, Marcus began climbing the outside of the building. The tower's external surface was smooth metal and reinforced polymer, designed to be nearly impossible to scale without specialized equipment. Under normal circumstances, attempting such a climb would be suicide. A single slip would result in a fatal fall, and exposure to enemy fire would make the ascent impossible to complete. But Marcus wasn't climbing to the top. He was climbing to the building's midpoint where the structure's communication arrays and power distribution systems were housed. If he couldn't reach the command center directly, he would bring the command center to him. Using his plasma rifle, Marcus began systematically destroying the building's internal systems. Not randomly. Each shot was carefully calculated to disrupt specific subsystems while triggering the tower's emergency protocols. Within minutes, automated safety systems began activating throughout the structure. "What is he doing?" Thokmar's confused voice echoed over the radio. The Krillian was watching Marcus's climb from his position at the maintenance access, but couldn't understand the tactical purpose of the seemingly suicidal maneuver. Vextar provided the answer with growing alarm. "He's forcing an emergency evacuation protocol. The command center systems are being transferred to the backup location." That was exactly what Marcus had been counting on. Coalition military doctrine required all critical installations to have redundant command capabilities in case of catastrophic failure. When the primary command center became inaccessible due to system failures, its functions would automatically transfer to the backup facility located 30 floors below a backup facility that Marcus was now positioned directly outside of. The emergency transfer took 3 minutes to complete, 3 minutes during which his opponents scrambled to reposition themselves for the new tactical situation. By the time they realized what had happened, Marcus was already cutting through the external barriers of the backup command center using his plasma rifle. "Impossible," Vextar roared. "You cannot simply change the objective location." But Marcus hadn't changed anything. The simulation's parameters called for accessing the command center and downloading tactical data. The system didn't specify which command center, and Coalition protocols automatically designated the backup facility as the primary objective when the original became compromised. Marcus dropped through the breach he had created and found himself in a compact control room filled with holographic displays and data terminals. The tactical download would take 60 seconds to complete, 60 seconds during which he would have to hold this position against 3 increasingly desperate opponents. He could hear them approaching through multiple routes. Vextar was descending through the elevator shaft using brute force to break through emergency barriers. Sildan was racing down the stairwell with fluid Viridian grace. Thokmar was climbing the external maintenance ladder with methodical Krillian persistence. All 3 would reach his position within minutes, and this time there would be no underground tunnels to escape through, no structural weaknesses to exploit, no way to avoid direct confrontation. Marcus began the tactical download and settled in to make his final stand. The first to arrive was Sildan, slipping through the ventilation system like liquid shadow. The Viridian emerged from an overhead access panel with his plasma rifle already trained on Marcus's position. But instead of firing immediately, he hesitated. The download terminal was positioned directly behind Marcus, and stray shots could damage the very equipment they were supposed to be protecting. That moment of hesitation was all Marcus needed. He rolled sideways, using the command center's furniture as cover while drawing his combat knife. Sildan's reflexes were inhumanly fast, but his Viridian psychology was predictable. He instinctively sought to maintain distance from opponents, using superior speed and marksmanship to control engagements. Marcus closed the distance before Sildan could adjust, forcing the Viridian into close-quarters combat, where his species' advantages were neutralized. The knife work was brutal and efficient. Techniques learned from human military history where edged weapons remained relevant long after the advent of firearms. Sildan went down just as Vextar burst through the main entrance, his massive frame filling the doorway. The Zephyrian took in the scene with quick intelligence. One opponent neutralized. Download still in progress, human-cornered but dangerous. Finally, Vextar growled. A proper fight. The Zephyrian advanced with calculated aggression, his forearms allowing him to wield multiple weapons while maintaining defensive positions. This was what he had been trained for. Direct combat where superior size, strength, and reach would determine the victor. Marcus backed toward the download terminal, checking his timer. 37 seconds remaining. He could hear Thokmar approaching from the external access, probably 15 seconds away from joining the battle. Once the Krillian arrived, the engagement would become hopeless. No human could fight 2 elite aliens simultaneously in confined quarters. Time for one last desperate gambit. Instead of trying to fight Vextar conventionally, Marcus did something that violated every principle of tactical engagement. He dropped his weapons and charged forward empty-handed. Vextar's reaction was instinctive and predictable. Faced with what appeared to be a suicidal attack, he adjusted his stance to deliver a crushing blow that would end the engagement immediately. His superior reach and strength made such an outcome inevitable, which was exactly what Marcus had been counting on. At the last possible second, Marcus dropped into a slide that carried him beneath Vextar's defensive position. Human flexibility and low center of gravity allowed maneuvers that the larger alien couldn't match. As he passed between the Zephyrian's legs, Marcus grabbed two of the thermal charges from Vextar's equipment harness. The Zephyrian spun around with impressive speed, but Marcus was already moving toward the command center's structural supports. The thermal charges were designed for breaching operations, powerful enough to cut through reinforced barriers in seconds. "You'll bring down the entire section," Vextar warned, genuine alarm in his voice. "Only if you keep fighting," Marcus replied, his hand hovering over the activation controls. The download timer showed 18 seconds remaining. "We can wait here together until the mission completes, or we can all get buried in rubble. Your choice." It was the most human solution possible, mutually assured destruction as a negotiating tactic. The simulation chamber powered down with a deep hum, artificial walls and holographic environments fading away to reveal the sterile metal confines of the training facility. Marcus stood in the center of the now empty space, still holding the deactivated thermal charges, his breathing heavy and his uniform soaked with sweat. Around him, his three opponents slowly rose from their positions, their expressions ranging from bewilderment to grudging respect. The silence stretched for long moments, broken only by the hiss of the chamber's ventilation systems cycling fresh air. Through the observation windows, Marcus could see hundreds of cadets pressed against the transparent barriers, their faces reflecting the same shock that permeated the arena itself. General Thraktar's voice echoed through the chamber's speakers. But for the first time since Marcus had known him, the Zephyrian commander seemed at a loss for words. "Cadet Chen," he began, then stopped, his breathing audible over the communication system. The chamber doors opened with a pneumatic wheeze, and Thraktar strode inside, his massive frame casting shadows across the metal floor. His copper scales were darker than usual, a sign of deep emotional turmoil in his species. Behind him came a stream of academy instructors, senior cadets, and observers who had witnessed something unprecedented in the facility's history. Marcus straightened to attention, unsure whether he was about to be congratulated or court-martialed. His unconventional tactics had achieved the mission objectives, but they had also violated numerous protocols and challenged fundamental assumptions about proper military conduct. "Explain yourself," Thraktar commanded, stopping within arm's reach of the young human. His forearms were crossed, but his expression was unreadable. "Explain how a cadet who failed basic marksmanship exercises defeated 3 of my best students using methods that appear nowhere in coalition tactical doctrine." Marcus met the general's gaze without flinching. "Sir, I used human military doctrine. Specifically, principles of asymmetric warfare developed over several thousand years of conflict on my homeworld." "Human doctrine involves the destruction of objectives rather than their capture?" Thraktar's voice carried a note of incredulity. "When necessary, sir. The mission parameters required securing the strategic locations, not preserving them. A destroyed weapons cache cannot be used against coalition forces. A collapsed communications array cannot coordinate enemy activities. A backup command center accessed through unconventional means still provides the same tactical intelligence." Vextar stepped forward, his own massive frame dwarfed by his commander's presence. "General, the human fought without honor. He used deception, environmental destruction, and threats against non-combatants." Marcus felt a flash of anger at the accusation. "With respect, Cadet Vextar, I threatened no non-combatants. This was a military simulation against military opponents. As for honor," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Human concepts of honor include protecting one's people by any means necessary, ensuring mission success despite overwhelming odds, refusing to surrender when surrender means the suffering of innocence." "Innocence?" Thokmar's rumbling voice carried confusion. "This was a training exercise?" "No, sir," Marcus replied, his voice growing stronger. "This was a test of whether humans deserve to serve alongside the galaxy's warrior species. If I had failed, Every human cadet at this academy would have been relegated to support roles. My people's reputation, our future in the coalition military, our ability to protect human colonies from threats, all of that hung in the balance. The observation area had grown completely silent. Even the constant background chatter of a military facility had stopped as word spread through Kepler Station. A human cadet had not just defeated alien opponents. He had done so using tactics that challenged every assumption about warfare, honor, and the nature of military excellence. Sildan stepped forward, his silver scales catching the chamber's overhead lighting. "I have studied human military history since our engagement," he said quietly. The tactical principles he employed are consistent with documented human conflicts. Guerrilla warfare against superior forces, environmental exploitation as a force multiplier, psychological operations designed to disrupt enemy decision-making processes. "Are you defending his methods?" Thraktar asked, his tone dangerous. "I'm explaining them, sir." Sildan's voice remained calm but carried new undertones of respect. "Human military doctrine is not dishonorable, it is different. Where we value individual excellence and direct confrontation, they emphasize adaptability and systemic thinking. Where we seek glory through personal combat prowess, they achieve victory through collective coordination and resource optimization." General Thraktar turned his attention back to Marcus, studying the young human with new eyes. "During your species' first contact with the Coalition, your representatives claimed that humans could contribute unique perspectives to galactic defense. Military officials dismissed these claims as primitive boasting. We assumed that any species capable of spaceflight would have developed similar tactical frameworks. We did develop similar frameworks, sir," Marcus replied. "We also kept the old ones. Human military tradition includes both modern combined arms operations and ancient principles of irregular warfare. We learned that sometimes the most advanced solution isn't the most effective one." Thraktar began pacing around Marcus, his movements predatory but thoughtful. "You demonstrated tactical creativity that exceeded my expectations. But creativity alone does not make a warrior. How do I know that your methods can be taught to others? How do I know that human unconventional thinking can be integrated into coalition doctrine without compromising our operational effectiveness?" Marcus had been hoping someone would ask that question. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Granted. Human military effectiveness isn't based on individual superiority. It's based on systematic adaptation and collective problem-solving. What I demonstrated today wasn't special human talents, it was a different approach to analyzing tactical problems. Those analytical methods can be taught to any species willing to question their assumptions about optimal solutions." The general stopped pacing and faced Marcus directly. "You are suggesting that human tactical doctrine could benefit non-human forces?" "I'm suggesting that diversity of tactical thinking makes any military organization more effective, sir. Zephyrian strength, Viridian speed, Krillian endurance, human adaptability, combined properly, these create capabilities that exceed the sum of their parts." A new voice joined the conversation from the observation area. "An interesting hypothesis, Cadet Chen." Everyone turned toward the speakers as Admiral Kethran's image appeared on the chamber's communication screens. The Coalition's supreme military commander was an Exarian, a species known for their analytical intelligence and strategic thinking. Her presence in the conversation elevated the significance of the entire event. "Admiral," Thraktar acknowledged with a formal bow. "General Thraktar, I have been monitoring this exercise through Academy channels. The tactical innovations displayed by Cadet Chen warrant serious study. I am ordering a comprehensive review of human military doctrine for potential integration into Coalition training programs." Marcus felt his heart racing. This was beyond anything he had hoped for when he accepted Thraktar's challenge. Not only had he proven human capability, he had potentially opened the door for his species to contribute to galactic military development. However, the Admiral continued, such integration will require extensive testing and evaluation. General Thraktar, I am assigning you to oversee a new program, the Asymmetric Warfare Development Initiative. Cadet Chen will serve as your primary human advisor. Thraktar's expression shifted through several emotions, before settling on something that might have been satisfaction. Understood, Admiral. And the other human cadets? Will remain in the officer training program, with additional focus on unconventional tactics and cross-species coordination. If Cadet Chen's methods prove broadly applicable, Human contributions to coalition defense could be far more significant than we originally anticipated. The communication ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Marcus realized that not only had he saved his fellow humans from relegation to support roles, he had potentially established his species as valuable contributors to galactic military doctrine. Thraktar approached Marcus one final time, extending one of his massive hands. "It appears I owe you an apology, Cadet Chen. And perhaps more importantly, I owe your species a debt of recognition." Marcus shook the offered hand, feeling the incredible strength in the general's grip. "No apology necessary, sir. Today was about proving that humans belong here. Mission accomplished." "Indeed," Thraktar replied, and for the first time since Marcus had known him, the general's expression carried genuine warmth. "Though I suspect that slapping you was the most strategically significant mistake I have ever made." As they left the simulation chamber together, Marcus reflected on the strange path that had brought him to this moment. A moment of defiance born from wounded pride had become a demonstration of human tactical philosophy. A personal challenge had evolved into a species